Joining us now, the Atlantic senior editor, David Frum. So, David, help me make sense of this. I mean, as I said a moment ago, it's not as if Congress has been a highly functional place for its existence. Oftentimes, it's punctuated by, if not vitriol, then actual violence, or it has in its past. But it feels like we're in a really weird and surreal moment. Do you understand what's going on?
I think the book you're referring to is The Field of Honor, which is a remarkable
No, The Field of Blood.
Field of Blood.
Yeah, Field of Blood.
And it's worth remembering that the Congresses of the 1850s, half the members were drunk all the time, so that was a kind of excuse. I don't know that that's true today. But look, there was a plan here, and what you're watching is the breakdown of the failure to implement. The plan was that this Congress, the Congress elected in 2022, was going to have a big Republican majority and was going to use that majority to set up investigations, which at a maximum would severely hurt the Biden administration and at a minimum would neutralize the scandals of the Trump administration. That plan ran into trouble immediately because Republicans had such a bad election in 2022. It wasn't just they won a very narrow minority in the House. They dropped a seat in the Senate. They dropped 2 governorships. They dropped 4 state legislatures. So from the beginning, they were on the wrong foot. Then the investigations all went wrong, partly because there wasn't anything there, and partly because the thin Republican majority just didn't have the talent. I mean, you see James Comer. He's not in control. He's not respected by his own Republican members. And to the Democrats, he's just a weak joke. So the scandal politics that were supposed to advance, at least advance harm against the Biden administration and at a minimum defend Trump, they are not working. Then Trump's legal problems got so much worse. He is in court, on jail, on felony charges. He may be in prison soon, and there are other trials coming. He owes $500 million in civil fines. He had to post a bond that may or may not be a valid bond. And the Republican Congress then began to turn on itself. Then throw into all of this 2 hand grenades. One is border security, which Republicans said they wanted, and where they had the humiliation of destroying their own bill. And then the other was the split over Ukraine. There was half the Republican Congress that wanted to defend Ukraine, and half the Republican Congress that wanted to, the House, I should say, it was in the Senate, it's a majority. Half the Republican House members, a little more, wanted to sell out Ukraine. And in the end, Johnson bet on the pro-Ukraine side and and then that destroyed any kind of working majority for him. So what you're watching is just the failure and chaos and rubble from a strategy that was put in place in order to advance Republican hopes in 2024 and that isn't working.
Let me ask you about just these appearances. Part of this is a tryout for would-be or wannabe vice presidential running mates for Donald Trump. We've seen a number of senators that have gone up that are hoping for that, as well as former governors or current governors or representatives. The last vice president that Donald Trump had, Mike Pence, left office under threats to hang him, threats that were, if not outwardly endorsed, then, basically endorsed by Donald Trump himself. What kind of person wants the job of VP to President Trump, and what sort of deal are they making or assurances are they making to themselves or potentially to the candidate about what they'd be willing to do to not end up in the same position as Mike Pence? Well,
I think there are basically 2 groups here that I see. That there are the people, Doug Burgum, J.D. Vance, who have their own vision of themselves as a potential president, and they think you just eat the toads through 4 years of Trump vice presidency, then he leaves office, and then you're well positioned to be the party's nominee and president yourself. The problem is Trump recognizes those people. What he is looking for is an absolute human zero. Somebody who, if he says, hang Mike Pence, will put the noose around his own neck and hang himself first. That anything that smacks of talent or character or independent judgment is going to be anathema to Trump. He's going to say, I don't want those people. What I'm looking for is a contest of self-humiliation in which I can pick the most negligible person, maybe who adds, gender or racial diversity to the ticket, maybe, but the prime criterion is zeroness. And we're watching, America's Next Top Zero.
You wrote a few weeks ago about how you don't think President Biden should ever debate Donald Trump. You said that debating Donald Trump would be elevating him as a worthwhile or worthy candidate here, that he shouldn't be treated as such. He should be treated as a traitor. In the time since you wrote that, there have now 2 debates been scheduled with different circumstances around them, by a news organization in a studio, no audience, the mic will get cut off when a candidate goes over time. Are you reconsidering your position?
Well, I'm not sure the debates are going to happen, and I'm not sure that the Biden people have quite rejected the logic of what I argued. I think they just wanted to put Trump in a position where sooner or later he has to say no. My point was not that don't elevate him. Donald Trump is going to be the Republican nominee for president. He's a past president of the United States. Obviously, he's one of the most elevated people in the world. At least he's conspicuous. My concern was, just remember, you have to watch TV, as we all know in the TV world, with the sound off to understand the real message of the media. When you put Donald Trump on the stage with the president of the United States, what you're saying is these are equal categories here, and not just in terms of prominence, but in terms of position and character. Look, the president does not do joint appearances with people indicted for and convicted of felonies. Donald Trump is indicted for felonies. He may soon be convicted. What is going to happen on that debate is the very expert moderators who are very skilled, fair-minded TV people are going to be constantly saying, President Biden, we are going to get to the overthrow the Constitution point in a minute, but right now the topic is inflation, or the topic is foreign policy, or the topic is what have you. And so President Biden will be put in a position where a violent attempt to overthrow the Constitution will be considered one issue out of many in this joint appearance between the president of the United States and an indicted and maybe convicted felon. But it's not one issue out of many. It is the issue. And if President Biden will not insist that this is the issue, who else is going to insist that this is the issue?
Yeah, you argue it'd be very strange for the moderator to say, we'll get to Mr. Trump's alleged violent coup in a moment, but in this segment we're discussing food prices, equalizing those two as if they are at all equal. David Frum, it's really good to have you. Everyone go read his pieces in The Atlantic. Also, if you're interested, The Field of Blood, Joanne B. Freeman, really good book.